So back in 2020, one of the first games I made was a browser game called BeWitched. You played as a witch in a magic school, where, after a miscast spell, most of the furniture has gone berserk. The game was a reverse tower defense where you had to protect the students heading to class from the furniture that was trying to eat them. The game was heavily inspired by old score-based arcade machines, but the Donkey Kongs and the Pac-Mans of the 80s still had one thing my game lacked: the actual physical machine, something that people can touch and interact with. So, over the last few weeks, I turned my simple browser game into a full-sized working arcade machine. Now, I have none of the skills actually required to build an arcade machine. I'm what experts might call chronically online. So, are the techniques I use to cut, stain, and wire this machine the best? No, definitely not. But I have a lot of screen time, so a project that doesn't require blue light to be constantly assaulting my eyes seemed like a pretty good idea, and then all I would have to do is spend even more screen time editing this video.
He's right.
So this pen and paper sketch is what I used to figure out the dimensions of the machine. I already knew that the width of it was going to be 30 inches due to the screen size that I was using, and the doors in my house are only 28.5 inches wide, so I did my best to maintain that classic arcade machine shape by having a 28-inch depth and a 70-inch height. So I did some measurements, and then me and my friend were finally able to start doing some physical labor. As long as you have the right tools, this is actually pretty easy. The only main concern was making sure the multiple pieces were the same size, and luckily everything went fine and there were no mistakes at all.
Yeah, I meant to tell you, cut on the wrong side of the line there.
Okay, good, it doesn't matter. Because when I started cutting... We assembled the skeleton of the machine and the dimensions were exactly as specified. Which, unfortunately for me, confirms that my height clocks in at a meager 5'8". There was a lot more wood that was cut, but you get the idea. I took a saw and I moved it in a straight line. The process never really changed. The control box was the next thing that I worked on. I ended up getting about 8 cherry switches. I kind of wish I got a joystick, but I was worried I wouldn't be able to set it up properly. Although only using the buttons made it pretty easy to mark on the board where I needed to cut. Now initially I wanted the control box to be detachable, that way it would be a lot easier to mess with the wires inside, but then I realized that it would cause the top panel here to not be flush, and I didn't want that, but I think having the flat surface definitely makes it look a lot cleaner, even if there is the cuts on the actual control panel's sides. After assembling the box, I had to learn how to connect the buttons to an iPad controller I bought. This thing is great because it connects with a USB and it acts like a keyboard with no additional software needed. Now this was actually my first time crimping and connecting wires, and I had to mess around underneath the machine in order to connect them all. I had to connect these wires to the buttons like 4 times throughout the project, and things only got more difficult as more stuff was added to the interior. I did a quick playtest with my laptop and the buttons, and although I wish I got a joystick, I was pretty satisfied and ready to move on. The next big hurdle was painting, and I am not an artist, so I would not be able to do like a really good cabinet design or even like a good graphic title for the marquee. So I tried to think of what I could do with my limited skill set. The game takes place in a magic wizard school. I made bookshelf and chalkboard sprites, and the main enemies are enchanted objects. Gotcha! And that's when I got the idea to theme the cabinet as a bookshelf arcade machine. It made too much sense. I realized that if I stained the wood a walnut color, I could avoid having to do art that requires skills I don't have. And a chalkboard would justify my kindergarten level handwriting. Now, staining the pieces was almost like a therapeutic experience. It was very relaxing to just be able to paint outside in like the fresh air, especially because the weather was really nice. And it really reminded me of those old Bob Ross videos.
And just beat the devil out of it.
Initially, I just brushed the stain on, but my grandpa was a carpenter and he taught my mom that like using a rag was always a better option when staining. So I started doing that and it definitely looked a lot better, and I think it made the stain be much more even across the whole machine. I also chose not to stain the parts that wouldn't be seen, and this was a good idea because this drop was all that remained in the paint can at the end. The stain took a few days to, I think, cure is the word. So while it was curing, I set up the Raspberry Pi that would be in the actual machine. For the OS, I ended up not using Picade and just the basic Debian distribution. I followed this guide by Ilya Kabetz in order to set up the local hosts using Nginx. The guide here also went in how to get the host to auto-run on startup. And once I got the game running, I messed around with the resolution, that way it fit the screen size with only minor issues. With the stain dry, all that remained were finishing touches. For the shelves, I drilled the holes directly into the wood using a hand drill. But please don't do this, it was pretty dumb actually. The wood I planned to use for the marquee was bending in the center, so I swapped it to a more durable piece of particle board to make adding the molding a lot easier. I absolutely love how this chalkboard came out, I think it looks incredible. And that was the last step that I did to actually finish the machine, so even though you've kind of already seen it be constructed, I guess here's the big reveal.
If you are a fan, we don't have to tell you that video games are taking this country by storm.
You can get hooked on it.
Are you?
Yeah.
It just takes a lot of skill, hand-eye coordination, and it doesn't cost as much as some other things, and it's legal.
Pretty cool, right? I mean, I at least think it's pretty cool. But yeah, this definitely came out a lot better than I expected. It also took a lot longer than I expected. I genuinely thought that I could finish this in like 2 weeks. Don't know why I thought that. There are definitely a couple of things I would have liked to have changed, like adding molding on the sides here. I think the stain, we could have added maybe a gloss on afterwards. That way it doesn't feel like you're rubbing rough wood. And the marquee up here ended up also getting a couple of air bubbles, even though we applied it with very smoothly. I don't know how to get rid of those. I do have another project in the works that should hopefully be done in about a month. So if you're interested in that, definitely subscribe, and who knows, maybe you'll end up seeing a BeWitched arcade cabinet in your local arcade. So thanks.